Well, welcome to the No Show. My name's Andrea Edwards.
I'm Tim Wade.
And I'm Anna Flinn.
There we go. Welcome.
That was. We did that well.
We did.
It's amazing.
We're gonna have to sack Joe.
Andrea, you're in a what's happening for you right now? You're in a storm.
Well, I'm 2 weeks into recovering from my booster vaccine, and there's a big storm hitting Phuket as we speak. I've lost electricity twice, so if the screen goes black, that's what's going on. If it gets too bad, we won't be able to continue, but we're going to give it a go.
Well, I'm in a holiday chalet, so the furthest we can get away from Singapore is next to the airport. And so I'm in a room that is extraordinarily echoey. So you'll see in a wide shot that I've covered my microphone with a tea towel, and now it looks a bit like Mother Teresa. But that's okay. Hopefully the recording will be blessed.
Yeah, you're up at the chalets that are I know those ones. I go biking past them.
The Changi, the Civil Service Club one.
Yep. Yeah. They're quite nice.
Very nice. I love it.
Yeah, they're good. Yes, and I'm dealing with the vaccine blues too. So I've had the last week where it's to the point that I am really the inner child is just going, where is my mummy? Where is my chicken soup? And where is my tomato soup? You can just tell what I used to get fed when I was 5 and not feeling good.
Yeah,
that's why you're a superwoman.
Around. Yeah,
exactly.
All right, shall we introduce our guest today?
Oh, yes.
All right. Yes. I'm going to hand it over to you, Anna.
Okay. So here we have Lavinia Thanapathy, who is an absolutely stunning and amazing woman who I have known for, but I'm not even going to say how long I've known her. But I think I've known Lavinia even longer than I've known the two of you, which is saying something because I've known both Andrea and Tim, quite some years. Yeah. Lavinia and I met originally at a professional women's association, and we have been friends and stalwart supporters of each other and our goals and missions in life for an incredibly long time. So it's wonderful to have her here, and I know that she's going to be sharing some of the things that she's speaking up very strongly about. But one of the things she's done absolutely amazingly in the last 2 years is really shown up, like Andrea on LinkedIn, and Lavinia is now one of LinkedIn's top 20 voices, which is pretty cool for someone who, I think the way you described it to me when we had lunch and we were trying to work out what we should be doing, that you felt like you were just dipping your toes in, and that was only about 3 years ago. So you've done some absolutely amazing things in that platform and helping people find their voice in that way, Lavinia. And I know how much you've stood up for women and change and being able to be your most powerful self. So I'm really looking forward to this show, the No Show with you.
Yeah.
Oh, it's fabulous to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so but Lavinia, in your own words, do you want to give everyone a bit of a quick overview of the wonderful life you've led so far?
So hi, I'm Lavinia Thanapathy, and I am based in Berlin, Germany at the moment. I'm from Singapore, which is where I know all these fabulous people from. And what I do now is I help people with navigating change. I work on personal branding, and my lifelong journey has been to close the gender gap. I am currently part of a very exciting campaign called #ThisLittleGirlIsMe. And that's part of an organization that I brought to Singapore called Inspiring Girls Singapore. Inspiring Girls is part of a global network, and I'm the founding chair for Singapore. And right now, if you've seen it on Instagram and LinkedIn, you've probably seen a lot of stories of women sharing their career journeys and where they've come from and advice to their younger selves. So our goal is to ensure that that girls get lots of role models to choose from so they can see lots of different options for their career journey going forward. So that's pretty much me, except for one little thing that you probably don't know, which is that I have, in total, my husband and I have 5 children. So we have 4 adults and 1 kid left in the house. So we have done the parenting journey from every angle. So this is my little exciting side hustle.
It's not that much of a side hustle, Lavinia. It's a fairly important part of your life.
Yeah, and well done on this Little Girl Is Me campaign. It's it's really quite powerful what I'm watching a lot of the women share, and people who aren't even connected to you. I'm seeing people sharing it. So well done. I think it's running. The deadline to participate is almost over, right?
Well, it's in the run up to the International Day of the Girl, which is on the 11th of October. And this is a day that focuses on the reason there is an International Day of the Girl Child is simply because the development of girls, particularly in the developing world, has very much lagged behind that of boys. So focusing on what still needs to be done to ensure girls are as nurtured as boys and given the same opportunities is important. So yes, it's been in the month in the run up to the 11th of October. So if you haven't yet, please join us. All you need is, you don't need to be famous. I mean, we've had some fabulously famous women participate. You don't need to be invited. All you need to do is post a picture of your younger self with a little bit of a story about your journey, professional or personal, and some advice to your younger self or to the young women who are reading your post, and then use the hashtag "This Little Girl Is Me."
So if you're looking for inspiration, have a look do a search for the hashtag and see what other people are posting. And I haven't done it yet, but I'm feeling that I should. I don't like to do what everybody else does. That's not my thing, right? So, but I think it's so important what you're doing.
The story was stunning.
I feel excluded, but at the same time, I love it, and I've seen it come up in my feed of a lot of women doing it. And as a father of a 5-year-old girl, I love the fact that this is happening, and I love the fact that Disney's got a lot of women role model characters coming out in their movies, and I love the fact that access to these sorts of role models for her is there. So congrats, and I didn't know it came from you. That's awesome.
It's not from me. Sorry, it's from an organization that I am part of. So this
That's
started.
awesome.
It is. So Miriam
That's still
Gonzalez,
awesome.
who runs Inspiring Girls International, she is the powerhouse behind the Inspiring Girls Network, and they exist all over the world. So you'll see posts in different languages as well. So it's really been a very global campaign. Inspiring Girls is a global network. There is one in Singapore. There's one in Indonesia, in Asia, I think, and then Hong Kong. I think that those are the 3 big ones in Asia, but all over the world.
Yeah.
You know what would be a nice sort of follow-up campaign is to get the men or the boys to say something amazing about their sister or mother in a way that excludes a bunch of stereotypical things and look beyond that to amazing things. Because then you've got the men sharing the women's stories too, and that could also be a game changer. Just a thought.
That's
I'd
wonderful.
love to be able to do that.
I think some of the supportive men in our networks have been sharing the campaign and encouraging the women that they know to participate. Some of the men who cannot possibly bear the spotlight not being on them have started This Little Boy Is Me campaign, which is going nowhere. So it's kind of like allyship sometimes means you don't get the spotlight on yourself. So I think the men who have been super supportive, men like you, have really been just sharing those stories with the women in their network, encouraging people in their network to participate. This is really to there is a difference from a very young age in the way girls' confidence develops, in the amount of participation they have, particularly in STEM subjects. So the goal of all of this is to get them participating. So fabulous. Thank you very much, Tim.
It's like International Women's Day. All the men are like, "Where's International Men's Day?" And it's like, it's in November. Go and do it. Go and do what you need to do on International Men's Day, and leave International Women's Day alone. Anyway, should we get stuck into the news that struck a chord this week?
Yeah.
You guys ready? All right. Can you guess what the biggest story of this week has been?
Well, I actually, given the lineup that you have, it was really different to the one that I expected because.
Oh.
Yeah. But you lead off, and then we'll get into talking about it.
Well, I think the biggest news story, well, the one that obviously got the most attention, was the Pandora Papers. So if you haven't been digging into that, I do definitely recommend you have a look. So 12 million leaked confidential financial records have basically thrown a light on the concealed wealth of powerful public figures around the world. Basically, it's essentially, this is how they hide their money. That's the story. So the King of Jordan, he's obviously had a lot of coverage. He's often the lead sort of person that's in the media coverage. And $100 million in concealed property was uncovered in Malibu, London, and Washington. He claims it's within his right as a king. Russia, Putin has a mistress who's had a little baby, and he has covertly bought her a lovely residence in Monaco. And the Czech Republic's Prime Minister, who is an anti-corruption crusader, apparently he's also secretly acquired a French Riviera estate. So there's lots and lots and lots and lots of stories right across the world. There's so many different ways this story is being told. It's a national story, it's an international story. So I found that really interesting. But in countries where media control is a thing, so countries like Jordan, Kenya, Russia, Ukraine, it didn't ever make it to the front page if it got any coverage at all. Ecuador, Chile, and Cyprus, it got a little bit of coverage, but lots and lots of denial. And then, of course, in countries like Azerbaijan, little to no coverage. So I found that side of the story equally interesting. Who talks about it? Where is it spoken about? Because, of course, you've got the Blairs who bought a property in London and didn't pay any tax because they bought it through one of those offshore companies. So,
which incidentally was completely legal.
Yes, it was all legal. Yeah, and there's definitely a lot of criminality. Yeah, absolutely. But that's the point of to me the whole story, right? There's a lot of criminality, money laundering, and there's a lot of illegality in the mix. But there is a lot of this stuff that's coming out. What they've done is not illegal, like the Blairs. And so when I stand back and look at this news, for me, it's a moral issue, right? With rising inequality around the world, famine in 20 countries, the divisions that are pushing us closer and closer to paths that we don't want to be on. I think that's, to me, the big part of this story. It's the wealthy are getting wealthier and the poor are getting poorer. And we're in a global economic crisis, which we're going to have to deal with as we come out of this pandemic. And so for me, it's a moral issue. Just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it. What are your thoughts? What did you pick up?
Well, I noticed, like you, that it was interesting which countries and which channels were covering it and which ones weren't. And some of it, in all truth, is sort of like, yeah, like, oh, this has been going on forever. There are some that is distinctly, not legal, but a lot of it's being done, it technically, and I don't even like using the word technically, there are ways of achieving certain outcomes and people are following those ways. Maybe like this is maybe, some people listening may say this is a shocking comment, but the truth is there's no moral obligation to pay tax. There's no moral obligation to pay tax. That's gone to the highest courts in many Anglo countries as a statement from the Chief Justices. It's not a moral obligation. You do have a legal obligation to pay according to certain rules. And so when people like talking about like some people using particular structures so they don't have to pay various taxes, it's sort of like, well, put it this way, most people like a discount. And what some people have done is found an equivalent way of creating a discount. Now that's not to dismiss the issue of inequality, but they're different places to be exploring rightness and wrongness from.
Well,
Yeah,
sorry.
No, you're right.
I was just going to say, not specifically about the papers, but I think actually globally we are due for a reset in the way we tax people. So I've been living here in Germany for over a year now, and we're always taxed in Germany because my husband's a diplomat. So it's never an option to be taxed anywhere else for us. So we're always paying very high German taxes, regardless of where we live in the world. But the benefit, the corollary of that is that we have extraordinary public services. Even though there were every German will complain about public services. Public services here are extraordinarily good at a very high standard. And so it's a real trade-off. But what happens is that Germany has a very high middle class, very big middle class. And the middle class is paying a lot of the tax. What happens when you're an entrepreneur, you own a company, the middle-sized companies that hold the German economy up, these organizations are able to transfer so much of their wealth through their companies, as opposed to regular Joes who go to work, and then when you accumulate a few assets, you want to hand them over to your children, you pay very high estate taxes. So I think the way that we've geared these systems, it's almost a gift to people with extraordinary wealth, and people with power will always have wealth. And so we have to think about how we are taxing and the way in which we benefit companies, because we think they drive our economy. So, but we don't benefit regular people I think we need to really change the threshold. No one earning, say, under $100,000 a year is actually wealthy. These are people more or less managing. So I think we need to look at all our tax systems. I think they benefit sophisticated people much more than they benefit regular people. So I think we should simplify it much more. So this is one of the things that I felt. I don't have a problem paying taxes, because here at least I see a huge benefit for my taxes. Education, everything, on all aspects. Sorry, back to you, Andrea.
No, I think it's a really great point. But also, when we get ready for the future, which is automation, robotics, where the human isn't necessarily going to be the one producing the goods, taking the environment conversation way out of it, but there's going to be less people required to do the work. So how are we going to manage it? So we do need to completely transform the whole taxation system. And the wealthiest among, if Amazon, if the majority of their workforce is robots, then they don't have the costs of healthcare of their employees and all the other things that their employees bring to the table. But equally, there won't be employees being taxed, paying into the state coffers, right? So there's a huge transformation with universal basic income in the middle. And I think we're going to, within this next decade, if we're going to get it, and also if we're going to move forward from a technological perspective, we need to transform everything. But the wealthiest people should be contributing their share to the roads, to cleaning up the environment, to the hospitals, to the schools, because those things benefit everyone. So yeah, I'm totally with you.
I do agree and just once again, this tea towel is because I'm in an echoey room, so my microphone is Yasser Arafat or Mother Teresa or someone. So hi, Mother Arafat. Look, I think there's definitely there's a Swedish. I think he's Swedish. There's a guy that's he did the rounds, doing TED Talks and other things about taxing people and getting taxation happening properly. And I think he was talking about American taxation in particular and how to fix it. I don't know if he was Swedish. I may have made that up, but it was quite interesting. What he was saying was a lot of their challenges can be fixed quickly if you tax the rich. Now, America's got a default crisis happening again, which was one of the things that leapt out in the news for me. And they're borrowing too much money to pay for all their bits and pieces, but they're not taxing the rich people. I mean, Bezos is shooting himself off into space with a lot of the money of that coming from tax subsidies and not paying a lot of tax. Trump hardly paid any tax, like $700 or something like that. These people aren't paying tax because they're using all the loopholes to hide it. And I think one of the things about the Pandora Papers is even though we all know that these people are hiding their money somewhere and using all these offshore accounts and everything else. All this is doing is saying yes, and it's this much. And if we're leading with the King of Jordan, for example, I mean, really, he's spent $70 million pounds, I think it was, on properties. Which I watch the football. I mean, that's one player, one medium player. But that's a lot of money. And the problem there, so there's a media spin on it, of course, as to who they want to put as their poster boy for being, bad. I think the problem there is that his country is going through a lot of austerity measures. So from the moral issue that Andrea is talking about, if you're imposing austerity measures on your country and going out and buying properties, and he's claiming that those properties are helping, the investments are helping do stuff for Jordan or something like that, but really it's family stuff, then it's a bit challenging. But I also see the other challenge. If you were running a charity and you were paid a salary and you saved your money through your financial intelligence and everything else, and you were driving around in a Porsche, the problem is driving around in a Porsche and running a charity from a public perception thing is a no-no. But if you're a banker, you're allowed to run around in a Porsche. So it's a bit unfair in one sense that perception is kind of, in one sense, perception is forcing people to go, well, you know, I'd like a second property or investment property, a few properties or whatever it is. But making it publicly known is drawing attention to me and whatever, rather than what I'm trying to do. So I'm not trying to defend it. I'm just trying to say that there is a challenge there if you're in this position of power, that some of these things should be kept private, especially if you are surrounded by cameras the entire time. So I can understand why there's an element of keeping things, keeping your private life really private and your private investments really private. But the other thing here, I guess, is also, and I think Anna was talking about it earlier, was financial intelligence, and the fact that the rich have access to high levels of financial intelligence because they've got surplus wealth to do something with, and so as a result, they look to how can I manage this better. Plus, they've got access to financially intelligent advisors who know all the loopholes, and so they're employing them to do the best thing with their money. And while that seems to be a sensible way to manage your money. So Andrea was saying it's a moral issue, like the Blair's one, and that one is it's a values integrity issue, because I think the Blairs were campaigning about tax loopholes being a problem, and yet he's exploited the tax loophole to buy the property without paying tax because he bought the company that owned the property. Therefore, he doesn't need to pay the stamp duty tax because actually the owner of the property didn't change because it's still the company. It was just the owner of the company changed. Therefore, he doesn't have to pay the stamp duty, which is, you know, if that's the case, then everybody should just have a company managing their property.
And he's not exactly stupid, and his wife is a lawyer, so it's not like, it's not an ignorant decision.
Yeah.
Do you want to jump in that before we move on?
Necessarily true.
Yeah. But
Well,
I think to take that forward at one level, what we're exploring here is that there's a finance system game. And you know, like if you think about the gaming world, you know, like you join in, you're on the basic level, you can only do basic, and you only have basic powers. And then as you get more sophisticated, you've got greater powers and things that you can do. And so it's full disclosure, I trained in economics law and have postgraduate qualifications in finance and investment. So I'm looking at a whole bunch of this stuff and going like, yeah, that's the rule book says, this is the rule book, you know, you're playing in the rules versus people who are playing outside the rule book. So that, you know, for me, there's a big distinction in that. But I'm pretty sure later on in the conversation, we're going to be getting into the equity side of things. So I'm going to leave the other space that you're exploring there, Andrea, in terms of, you know, a greater social divide that's coming up to that conversation there.
And I think,
well, actually, Anna, Andrea, who writes the rule book, I think, is the challenge. It's the wealthy write the rule book to help the wealthy. I mean,
yeah.
Well, who wrote the rule book? They did. But there's also a huge space there. We could go down a rabbit hole, you know, and Andrew might be good to move on. But there's a lot of mythology around what makes money money. Yeah. And the reality right now is it's a bunch of digital electrons that people choose to put trust in. So
yeah, but I think it just comes down to and it is, and you know, when we talk about what we need to do to transform our whole global society, this is a piece of it. You know, we need to transform those loopholes out. Hey, so Lavinia, if you need to cough, there's a mute button down on the left.
Yes, so I also needed to grab a warm drink. I'm sorry, my throat has been acting up, so
no
just had to
problem.
run away. Sorry,
all right,
for the mute button.
Andrea, I think the distinction is I would invite us to drop the conversation about it being loopholes, because that's a backward thing, as opposed to what constructs would enable prosperity that was actually truly possible across the world in a certain vast varieties of countries and economic conditions. I mean, back in the 60s, people thought by the time it got to the 2020, we'd be working 15-hour weeks. That was the forecast, that the promise of all the automation and the digitization was going to be we're working less. And yet somehow we've created a social structure where we're working longer hours at a lower standard of living, or a lower perceived standard of living, in the developed world. So there's a whole bunch of other things that are going on. And I'm sure that we can parse that up in another part of the news.
Yeah, and I think it just but stand back from this news. Like, don't make it an us against them. This is a society that we live in that we need to transform. So try and look at it. Try and look at this information through very objective eyes. I think that's the key message we always want people to take away when we share the news, right? Because if you look at this media sensationalization around this story, it's very easy to get caught up and get angry towards the wealthiest, which creates more problems and more divisions. And what we need is less of that. So just really stand back from it. That would be my advice. And there's a lot to it, and we've got a lot of change that we need to make. Every single one of us has a lot of change that we need to make to get in balance, right? So that's just a piece of the story. So moving on to COVID. So Alaska is now the worst hit US state with COVID, with doctors at the point of having to decide who lives and who dies. But the other thing is there's a big, strong movement in Alaska that believes that COVID is fake. It's not even a real pandemic. And I'm always constantly spun out by that, because I don't know how long we have to go on this road before people start acknowledging what's before our eyes. But a lot of the doctors, if they turn up at community meetings to say, please wear masks, their lives are actually being threatened. So that's pretty messy. We discussed last week that the US has now hit 700,000 deaths from COVID, and that is higher than the 1918 flu pandemic. And it's due to the combination of vaccine refusal as well as the Delta variant. So just to give you a feel, the rise of cases in the US is predominantly in the southern states. In Florida, it suffered the most deaths of any state during the period since June, and has basically 17,000 people have died. And in Texas, they were second with 13,000 deaths. Both of these states account for 15% of the US population, but the deaths since the US has crossed the 600,000 threshold account for 30% of the nation's deaths. So it gives you a sense of like the real numbers that are on the ground. But on the other end of the earth, New Zealand has finally decided that they're going to abandon its zero COVID strategy. It seems that basically once Delta's gotten in, and I think you're seeing that in Singapore, once it's in, you can't stop it. So this is a big challenge for the country because, of course, when you approach a zero COVID strategy, you're not focusing on the vaccines, you're focusing on COVID control. So the population doesn't have incredibly high vaccination rates, but this is a big, big risk for the Maori population, who are much more vulnerable and susceptible because they live in sort of more tight-knit communities. So I'm expecting the news out of New Zealand to be potentially quite bleak as we move forward. Anything else for COVID that you guys have been listening to?
So my daughter has COVID.
Oh,
Yes, so we have. So Germany has actually been doing relatively well with COVID. It's never tried for a zero tolerance. The healthcare service has never been overwhelmed. We have very high vaccination rates. We do have what we call querdenken, so people who also think that masks are fake. And I live in a very central part of Berlin, so I see them parading past. We have protests in the summer. Every Sunday there's a protest, so about something or other. And so we've had at least 2 COVID protests, but they were required to be during the lockdown. They were required to have their protests in cars, which ruined the environment, of course, because they were not allowed to be out on the street, right? So it's mind blown. So it's a real problem with some people, but basically we have very high levels of vaccination. My father-in-law, who's 91, had his vaccinations like in February. So it was really very early. They really prioritized the older people. So what's happening now? So my daughter, who's 29, she lives in Glasgow, and she was vaccinated twice with Moderna in Scotland, and she came here she's working from home here in Berlin, and she lives with our other daughter who lives here, and she got it from I think she thinks from a yoga studio. So she has cold symptoms. And here, if you are non-symptomatic, so their whole household has just locked themselves in, and that's it. So here it's been being dealt with very practically. You have to wear masks indoors, on public transport, in shops, but basically on the streets you don't wear a mask, and certainly not out in nature you would never wear a mask. So it's a real mix. It's not like magic. I don't think it's a magic solution, but it's been very much under control here, in part because they let science take the lead.
Yeah.
And I think that's the big problem in many parts of the world, that it became politicized so early.
Yeah.
Not that there isn't politics here. There is politics here with COVID as well. But I think the countries that did well, who are continuing to manage with different variants, and as it takes its different flows and ebbs and flows, those have tried to really focus and allow the scientists to take the lead. So, yeah.
And it helped with Merkel's background as well, right? And a lady of science herself. So,
yeah, but Germany is a federal state. They're federal states, which means she cannot make COVID rules. The states have to agree, and the states are an old boys club, essentially. I think almost every state, except now in the new election, I think every state is led by a man. So she's like trying to herd, recalcitrant sheep. So some states like Bavaria wanted to open the economies. They wanted to ban people from other states. It's been chaotic here too. It's just because it's not in English, people don't realize. But she's definitely been able to hold everyone together.
Yeah. Oh, she's amazing. Anything else you guys have been looking at from a COVID perspective?
I think the thing that I've noticed is how much the narrative is still about fear. And that is interesting that's the lens that is continuing to be put out. I mean, it's because as soon as we put groups of people into fear, it locks them down, it makes them less creative, more susceptible to being controlled and all sorts of things. And there's enough information and science out there just going, okay. So like, for example, in Singapore, and I respect what they're doing at many levels, but I'm also really mindful that the fear levels here have meant that suicide rates are up at over 300% on what they were last year. So while the death rates technically of COVID directly are low, we're seeing deaths coming through in another form.
Yeah, I think
that's also elsewhere.
I think like New Zealand, I think Singapore is one of those countries where it's done so well for so long, and all of a sudden it's now got this COVID is just ripping. I mean, I've got two friends who've managed to pick it up, and they don't even know how they got it. So it's kind of ripping through. So I think it's more a bit of a shock. And of course, like we've talked about before, Israel had, their big COVID Delta wave, and Singapore learns a lot because of population size and similarities. So I don't know. I think the Singapore government's been cautious. I've seen a lot of criticism about it, but I don't know. I think I trust them, but I totally agree with you on the fear. If you're put into I think in the early months of the pandemic, fear definitely, right? That all of us, none of us knew what was happening. I think we're moving more into resignation mode now because it's just, it's never ending, right? I feel that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I think we've got another 6 months. The European Northern Hemisphere winter. I think what happens will matter as far as how we all feel about it. But I feel like we're heading towards the right direction now, which, took a long time. But I think if anything leaves you sitting in fear, you've got to really look into that and say, you can't operate from a place of fear. You can't make good decisions. You can't think clearly from a place of fear. So anytime you're sitting in fear, really sort of look into that and understand it and try and release it if you can, because none of us have got any control over this, right?
Yeah, and that's why I bring it up, because it's one of those subliminal narratives that's floating around, and it's easy to adopt it because it is just so all pervasive. And it's like, if you take Singapore, any country that's going like, okay, if we're going to live with it as opposed to eradicate it, and particularly with, say, something like Delta, it's mass. It's going to go through like flu goes through a country. It's going to go through. How many people are going to catch it? X number at a time, and it is what it is, and the numbers will be high.
Yeah.
Now we don't report people who have mild cases of the flu. We don't highlight it as an issue.
Yeah.
But we're highlighting COVID when people have mild cases, and so we're creating a layer of fear around, as opposed to there's this, and this that are all creating ones, and so the why letting the fear story get in the way is a big one. Sorry, Tim, over to you.
I was just going to say fear has its benefits, though. I think it got a lot of people vaccinated. When a wave comes through and another push happens, I think a lot of people went, oh my gosh, I better go get vaccinated. Okay, enough of this nonsense, or whatever it is. But at the same time, it does polarize, like you said, and it can. I think it's good for political campaigns. Basically, when there is a great deal of uncertainty, people tend to not add uncertainty to that, so they vote back in the people who are already there. However, when those people have been there for a while, even though they may have been very consolidating or disciplined or good or whatever, as soon as they leave, populations can often just go, well, now that we've got two uncertainties, let's go to the opposition. I don't know if that's what happened in Germany, but they shifted. I mean, I'd love to hear. We'll go to that. Perhaps we can go to the German election topic now that we have a Berliner. Du bist ein Berliner. But yeah, so that would be. Fear has its benefits, but it gets overplayed from a political perspective. But yeah, I do think the narrative is a bit all-consuming, but it has been a media darling, really, because they love fear and bad news.
So Justine Wallen just commented that she thinks on Facebook that she thinks that the fear will subside as we start to accept it as part of the reality of our lives. But I think the other thing that we've talked about before is we're always 2 weeks behind COVID, and countries who are conservative in their approach to dealing with COVID always prove to be right. The ones who are not conservative prove to be wrong. So you see Australian politicians, British politicians, they're making these decisions where they're not listening to the science, and then within a couple of weeks that's a very, very, very bad decision. But we're always 2 weeks behind. So it's a fascinating time, and I think we'll be studying human behavior during this time, probably for decades to come, right? Because it's been fascinating. So moving on to the next piece of news. The French Catholic Church is having its reckoning. So I don't know if you guys have seen this news, but it's pretty horrific. So basically, thousands and thousands of pedophiles have been found in the French Catholic Church and have been operating since the 1950s. They found evidence of between 2,900 and 3,200 abusers, and there's only 115,000 priests or clerics, so it's a pretty high percentage. The number of victims, they believe, is a minimum of 216,000 children. So I was raised in the Catholic Church. Every time this news breaks, I am absolutely disgusted in the church. But I think there's the biggest story of institutions like the what do you call them, the Boy Scouts in America. That last year, the claims of, and they've basically become a bankrupt organization since then. But it's like we're never going to get to the end of these stories of abuse, and I just find it quite sickening. Did you guys read anything about it?
Yep.
Wow.
Look, the one good thing from the French side, it's not a good. There's no good thing at all. But the French Catholic Church commissioned the investigation once the allegations in other countries were starting to emerge, and so they went in to find out, rather than presumably they were my presumption here is that they knew it would turn up at some point anyway, so they went in to uncover it. I think I personally, from an opinion perspective, I think the Catholic Church, I don't know how long it's going to be before they make the decision to allow their priests to marry and to move away from the celibate framework that's obviously been there for thousands of years, but 2,000. But
No, it hasn't
but
been there since. It hasn't been there for 2,000 years. It's not probably not even half of its history. They did it because basically there were too many babies being born, and they had to fund all these families. So it's actually not a permanent part of
it's
the
only
church
1,000
history.
years old. Middle Ages stuff. Okay, well, I mean, so my suspicion is that will change. It has to. That would have
Well,
to change.
They're going to destroy. But then I mean, some of my friends, my friends' mothers have left the church in their 70s because they're so disgusted by all of these revelations, right? But then you go to countries like the Philippines where the Catholic Church has never been more popular. So, this idea that it will destroy the foundations of the Catholic Church worldwide, I don't know. I think they're so powerful that I think it's impossible to believe, but nothing's impossible these days. But then the rise of atheism around the world, younger people, but also older people too, are losing their faith in institutional faith. It's not faith, it's faith in the institutions that they were often brought up with. So I don't know, it's just, and we have to think about, so this is the Catholic Church that's gone through the ringer for a couple of decades, and it's great that they are, because this deserves to come to the surface. But before that, people were willing to let it be unsaid. But there's many other faiths around the world that haven't gone through this time, and based on the traditions of faith and the institutions behind them, the Taliban were famous for pedophilia, so like there's a lot more to come from a lot of different faiths. So I think it's just a beginning.
I think there is some so I'm not Catholic, but I did notice that the first, I think for the first time, Pope Francis actually expressed shame, personal shame and shame for the church, I think in his statement about the case. So perhaps while very, very slowly, there are some changes institutionally in the church. But I agree with you. I don't think it's just the Catholic Church. I think there is a problem of abuse, and it always stems from unequal power.
Yeah.
So it's in any situation where there's unequal power, there's always potential for abuse. So yeah, I think it exists in all religions.
Yeah. So obviously always a tough conversation, but I think it's important that we talk about it, and the light should always be shone on abuse, because we need to stop it. It's these children are put into the care of these institutions, and they trust. I would never allow my children to walk into a church, because no way, I wouldn't trust them. So that's how I feel about it. So all right, let's move on to the environment. So there's a lot of things going on in the environment this week, and I'll sort of bunch it up and then we can sort of have a chat about it. So the first one was a big oil spill off the California coast. And while there's hundreds of these oil spills going on all the time, this one's caused major damage. We also had two very strange wet weather events. So the second one was in Italy, where they've experienced 2 feet of rain falling in half a day. And this has never, ever been seen or experienced before in Europe, in modern times, obviously. And then in Oman, there was a very rare tropical cyclone. So we've talked before about when we mess with the weather, we change the global weather patterns. This is one of those examples of it. And it brought a year's worth of rain. No, not a year's. It brought years worth of rainfall and deadly floods to the nation. And this is a country that rarely sees floods in a year. So I've got some friends living in Muscat who've gone through this, and it's there's a lot of destruction, especially outside the city. If we look at fires around the world, so in California, 1 in 8 acres in California has burned in the last decade. But then if we go across to Russia and Siberia, the emissions from the current fires are more than Germany's total annual greenhouse gas emission quota. We've been stunned by what's been going on in California, but in northern Russia, it's estimated that 65,000 square miles have been burnt this year, which is more than 6 times the area that's been burnt in the United States, right across the United States so far this year. The smoke from Siberia is spread to the North Pole for the very first time, and it's even spreading out to the Pacific Ocean. But don't worry, because according to the IMF, the fossil fuel industry is still getting $11 million a minute in subsidies, and this has not changed since the Paris Climate Agreement. And while in the past we've spoken about the World WWF report that says we all ingest one credit card worth of plastic a week. Well, the American Chemical Society has released some research that shows that infants digest 10 to 15 times the amount of microplastics that adults do. And we still have no idea how the microplastics are affecting our body. So babies are born with plastic in their bodies, and now they're ingesting 10 to 15 times more than the adults are ingesting. So there you go. That's some of the things that are going on in the environment this week, and there's always a lot more. What do you guys reckon?
It's one of those ones where gobsmacked. I mean, I was reading these ones too, but it's just like, man, like what? It's like knowing you're borderline diabetic and continuing to pig out on the sugar.
Yeah, it's a good analogy.
It's just not good. I mean, not that giving up the sugar. Hey, I was borderline diabetic and had to take sugar entirely out of my life. Hence why I drink gin and soda. No sugar in the soda water instead of the tonic water. But I mean, it was a lifestyle. It was distinct lifestyle adaptation. But the truth is, that's actually what we're doing.
There's another article that I just read it this morning. I didn't have time to sort of put it into the mix, but Apple, Disney, Microsoft, Amazon, there's a whole bunch of them. They all support these lobby groups who are all actively pushing back on Biden's climate a budget, basically. And when I was reading this article, it was actually really quite depressing, because by the time I got to the end, I realized that this is probably the last chance we've got to really create dramatic change at COP26, which is happening very soon. And we'll be talking a lot about that in those weeks. But, these big global companies are out there telling everyone they're going to be net zero. They're doing this, they're doing that, and all the wonderful things that they're doing. But the reality is they're putting money behind the lobby groups who are potentially going to stop progress being made. So that's all a bit depressing. Like, like Glenn last week, he said it. I thought it was beautifully expressed. He goes, I just feel so sad. I feel so sad for my children's future. That we've allowed our world to get to this point, and it doesn't feel like there's real true action being taken. It's just a lot of PR and spin.
Yep. I did read a couple of other stories as well. One of them was the Venezuela oil slick, in its lakes. It's seeping into the environment, their energy crisis, algae blooms impacting their water supply as well. So the algae and the oil slick are now taking up its freshwater lakes. The article being oil slicks and algae blooms marring Venezuela's largest lake are visible from space, presumably, and that's devastating its life and fishing industries as well. Then there was another article written, which I was more. What impressed me more about it in a negative way was the wording. And so listen to this wording, and this is where media plays a huge role. So a global energy crisis casts shadow on crucial climate summit. Okay, fair enough. The prospect of a cold winter with skyrocketing heating bills may weigh far more heavily on most people's mind than the distant, abstracted calculations that guide climate action. Yeah. And so, okay, I get the beginning of that, but distant, abstracted calculations, I don't think they're distant or abstracted anymore. And I think to keep playing that card of we don't know whether they're really the case is not necessarily great writing.
Which media?
That was Washington Post.
Right. Okay. So they tend to be on the more conservative side and the denial side when it comes to climate. That's their political posturing, right?
Yeah.
So I always, and that's really important when you read the media. Which angle are they coming from? Because you need to see between those lines. But at the same time, like an individual has the right to keep themselves warm during cold winter months, right? And they shouldn't feel guilty about that. They should be able to make the choice. But the government should be making the choices to make sure that the energy to heat their homes is a renewable energy. And so that's not on the individual because they can't do anything about it. It's on the governments and the big corporations to go and sort it out. And that's part of, Susanna Hassenholz's sort of angle. Like, don't feel guilty. You shouldn't feel guilty. Do everything you can, but there's things that you're not responsible for, but you shouldn't, it doesn't mean you should be living a miserable life, in whether it's freezing or sweating in the tropics, right? So, I don't know.
I guess the analogy for that one is when we turn on the heating in our house, there's not 3 switches there for oil heating, environmentally friendly heating or something else, but government has those levers at their disposal as to, and what were 11 billion or 11 million a minute in subsidies, whatever it was, is
11 million. Yeah, 11 million
subsidies per minute for the oil industry is a huge amount. So actually, when you remove those subsidies, the price of oil now becomes a heck of a lot more expensive, and that includes in the cost of damage and repairing the damage that it does. Yeah. So those subsidies make oil a lot more expensive, and they're going, it's so much cheaper than all these other ones. Well, yeah, that's because we're subsidizing it. I mean, if we flip the subsidy, what would happen? And but the technology is not so great for the climate one, or the technology is not so great for the wind turbines or whatever else it is. Well, yeah, but we need to invest in it to get it to be mass affordable, And the thing is, solar is already at that state. So really, I mean, it gets political.
May I add like a personal experience here? So here we've had the new elections, right? We have the Green Party that's going to form part of the coalition, and the Green Party has constantly been part of a thorn in the side of the government pushing for more green initiatives. So we have a lot of green policies here, but they're all very gentle. And what you need is a much more accelerated pace of these things. So for instance, if you have a house here in Germany, most houses here now have, many houses already have solar powered. They have solar panels on them. But the problem was they didn't do that for apartment houses. So I live in an apartment building in the city, and it's very complex to put solar panels on our roof, as opposed to if you had a house. Like my father-in-law and my husband's aunt, they all have solar panel, and they generate electricity for themselves as well as for the grid. So they sell excess solar energy that they generate into the grid. Electric cars also exist here in quite high numbers. So we have car sharing in the big cities in Germany. So you can just use an app and just jump into a car that's nearby. And most of those cars are electric. So there is definitely a huge move in that direction. Germany also has extremely high public transport usage. We don't use our car at all. So I'm on public transport almost all the time because it is very efficient, and you can do that in the cities. So I think there are multiple levels. You really have to build this into societies. I don't think there's an overnight fix. And what I see here is, and I had some guests from Singapore because there's a virtual travel lane to Singapore. Suddenly all the Singaporeans are visiting Germany. So they're looking around and seeing a whole different way of living. So, you always take your own bags to the supermarket. You never take plastic bags from the supermarket. You can't even go into a fashion store and get a bag. Even they will require you to use your own bag. So it's changing at every level. And the kids at school, my goodness, you would never catch a kid at school bring their lunch in a plastic bag. They would just all be, telling each other, "Oh my God, what happened? Did your mother not wake up this morning or something?" It would be such a non thing to do. So there's a real culture around reusing things, and there's a real culture around holding on to things and repurposing things. And so this comes with time, and it comes with changes that people can live with. They learn to live with it. The first time I came to Germany, I used to be so stressed about trash. I would collect my trash and tell my husband, where do I put it? Because there were so many different bins. I'm like, I don't know. What is this? What kind of trash is this? And I wouldn't know where to put it because I was so used to in Singapore, you throw everything into the one trash bin, and maybe you have the separated thing. But it's just so refined here. It's like in Japan is the other place that has this very, you really sort through your trash. And the amount of non-recyclable trash I have is really, really small. I have a huge amount of Verpackungsmüll, which is packaging. And that can be mostly recycled, and you can even drop it at your local supermarket. So, which forces the supermarkets then to put pressure on their suppliers not to provide so much packaging with their things, because you can drop off packaging at your supermarket.
And I think Europe, as far as individual contribution, I think it's phenomenal. But we were sharing a report a couple of weeks ago that the UK is the only country in Europe that's even close. It's still above 1.5, but the European Union, their current way of living and contributing to the way they harness energy and everything, the European Union is on track for 3.2 degrees global warming. So while individual contribution is definitely, people are doing it, although, the last couple of times I've been in Europe, it's not as impressive as I was expecting it to be. But my biggest concern is 62% of the world's population lives in Asia. And this is one of the fastest growing regions in the world. And this is where we need to see this dramatic change, because, of course, a lot of the Western trash gets shipped out to these parts of the world, where it goes into the waterways, goes into the oceans, and we're all doing beach cleanups, and we're picking up stuff from Europeans and Americans, Australians, Canadians. So, the global sort of big picture perspective, we're in a mess, and we need to get it sorted. But we also have a massive education challenge that we have to get out there in this part of the world as well. So progress, one step forward, 10 steps back, it kind of feels like. All right, so the last piece of news that I wanted to... Sorry.
I was just going to say there's a fairly big distinction, and just given we've got COP26 coming up, is that the more each of us say that, it's, to go back to the health analogy, once you realize that you're kind of borderline on something, the time is to take action now, not to go and kick it down and say, well, I'm going to do something in a decade. So quite a few of the corporate ambitions are backloaded. They're going, we will in the future. But in the meantime, we're going to keep doing all the bad stuff. And I think the time is now to say, okay, it's not convenient. And I get it's not convenient. I get that it's got costs associated. But the reality is there's a substantive amount of the technology and possibility that exists. And it's only by actively looking for it will we create the solutions that will get us there.
Yeah. Don't give up.
And it's like, okay, enough of pretending. It's like, do we want to play kindergarten or do we want to play adult?
Yeah. And we've got to keep the hope. Absolutely. And keep the hope alive. Don't get stuck in guilt. Like, if every one of us just sort of changes what we're doing, communicates how we're changing, tells our friends, our families, our communities, we ripple out, we create bigger impact. This is something that's in our control, a lot not in our control, but how we vote is in our control. So voting for people who don't believe in the climate crisis is obviously a big issue. Voting for people who are subsidizing fossil fuel companies, well, that's half the problem. But yeah, so we've got some challenges ahead. But the last piece of news I wanted to raise before we move into our theme for the week is there's been a lot of protests across the US, women's rights marches because of over abortion rights. And obviously this began when Texas made the heartbeat rule 15 weeks, I think it was, which for me, I try not to get involved too much in the regional or national news of countries, but I think abortion rights for women is something that is global and it's really important. But a Texas judge has temporarily blocked that ruling, so let's see what happens. But what was really interesting around this news is Americans are apparently strongly opposed to striking down Roe versus Wade. So this should give everyone some hope. So Republicans who want to keep Roe versus Wade are 58%. So obviously, and 40% wanted to get rid of it, overturn it. Democrats, 77% want to keep it, 17% want to overturn it. So nationally, 65% of the American voting population that did this Fox poll want to let it stand. So I think that's a really good sign that, we feel that Roe versus Wade is being overturned is imminent. Maybe it's not as clear cut as everyone thinks, because of course it will be a political disaster. The right for a woman to do what she wants to do with her body is something that I will fight for until the day I die. So I thought you guys would be interested in that. It's not as bleak as it looked.
Yeah. Hope.
Yeah. No comments?
No, it was I saw it, and it was one of those ones of good.
Yeah.
You know, it's not a decision that I would ever hope to make. It's a tough decision. You know, anyone I know who's been through that path, it's a really hard decision to make. But it's their decision. It's not somebody else's.
Yeah. But you'd like to, if you were ever in the situation, you would like the right to be able to make the decision for yourself, right?
Mm.
Yeah. They're just controlling how women dress, controlling what women do with their bodies, all of it. It is time for it to end.
Well, let's just be really honest. The only reason a she is in the need of one is because a he was involved.
Exactly. So why don't we just get proactive and, you know, just get vasectomies everywhere until they're mature enough to have a baby?
The irony is, of course, the same people who want to control women's bodies are the ones who want the freedom to choose not to wear a mask. It's ironically, the mask is the problem.
Yeah.
Really, you don't want to be forced to wear a
mask. Which
mask
are we talking about?
To have children.
Yeah. The right to a gun, the right to a mask, and the right to life, right? The hypocrisy and the irony of it all. It's just you can buy a gun in a Walmart, but you can't buy a kinder toy, right? You know, it's like anyway.
I think there's I haven't thought this through enough, and it would be interesting to see what the response is. But because a life is involved, I still think the woman should have the right to choose. But I think that it's almost like it would be interesting to have a panel of like this is going to sound like the dumbest idea in the world, but she has to do she before she makes that decision, she has to actually do this online course and go, yep, I understand the ramifications. And so that she gets the point of view of like maybe 6 or 7 different people, because otherwise she might be getting the point of view of Fox News or the guy or whatever the hell it is or whoever it is. But if she can actually get, because if she can get, she will get different points of view. She'll get one that is just like, no, you can do whatever you want. And then somebody else, maybe from a religious organization going, well, actually there's some other considerations. And then a scientist one going, well, we consider this, and then whatever it is, so that she can make as educated a decision as she can, but it's still her decision. And after all of that, she can still do whatever she wants.
I think you've been very brave putting this idea out there. So I've never known a woman who goes into an abortion who does not think of all the possible implications. You started off with saying we're still talking about a life, or there's different ideas about the concept of what a life is. The reality is a woman doesn't need to go out and get advice from 6 different figures with a religious institution in the mix. A woman needs to make a decision for her future based on the quality of the life that she can give. The people who are against abortion are not there for the life of the child. So they will say to a woman, you have to keep your child, but when it comes to educating the child, nourishing the child, loving the child, keeping the child safe, they are nowhere to be seen. So if a government wants to change its legislation around abortion, fine, but make sure you add all of the rest of it in so that you're taking care of the children that these women are being forced to conceive based on the laws that men are creating, not women. A woman knows what she wants. A woman knows what she wants to do with her body. She knows what she wants in her future. Not one woman I know who's ever had an abortion made the decision easily. It's a very hard decision for a woman to make. So I completely disagree with what you just said, and I think that's okay that we can disagree.
You're informed though, Andrea.
I think women are informed when it comes to that.
Tim, can I share a story on this one? When I grew up in the Philippines, and I remember at about 16 being on a retreat weekend, and the elders were not nearby. But the conversation was literally, can we pass a hat around so that we can each contribute? Because one of the girls had got pregnant. And the conversation was, how the hell did we support her in that?
Yeah.
And it was hideous for absolutely everybody, because we knew the struggle and the choice that she was in the midst of making. and the implications of if she had to said anything outside of that space, how much trust she had to show in us to even create any sense of any possibility of choice. It was very, we weren't old, but it was very, very real. It was not a light decision. It was not a light process for anybody. I can still feel it now, and it's 40 years ago now.
And I'm sure the shame within the society was still there, where you go to a country like Australia and the amount of single mothers is so high, and no one ever talks about the father's lack of involvement or even contribution towards these children, right? We just, a woman has the right to choose what she wants to do with her body, because it's about the right for her life and how she chooses to live her life, which I think brings us really nicely into our theme for the week. So Lavinia, if you want to sort of bring this into it as well. So we have globally slipped back by a generation since pandemic began. And I want people to really think about this word generation. It's not a decade, it's a generation. So this is a huge issue, and it's a very frustrating issue for me, and I'm sure for Lavinia and Anna, and for Tim as a husband, as a father of a daughter. You want your girls to have the same opportunities. And this is a conversation we've had before, and Joe, who couldn't be with us today, sort of said, why has this happened? And there was a US news report, a jobs report, December last year. 100% of the jobs were lost by women. 100%. We've obviously seen the rise of domestic violence all around the world, and of course, men also can suffer at the hands of domestic violence. But the rise has often been attributed to women, and and then of course the Afghanistan Taliban situation hadn't even started at the beginning of the pandemic. So when we look at equality for women was supposed to be achieved in 100 plus years, so it's probably well over 200 years now. Lavinia, this is one of your areas of expertise. It's an area of passion. Can you try and help our audience understand why we're where we are, but also what can we do about it? And then obviously, Anna, you've got a lot of insight into this as well, so jump in when Lavinia's had something to say. Over to you.
Thank you, Andrea. Well, I think what COVID did a lot was it showed up the fault lines in every society. I think it showed where the weakness was. In every country, it showed up where the fault lines were. Where was the weakness? Where was the imbalance? And all over the world, it showed up with women, because the imbalance of power definitely continues in relation to gender issues, right? So a lot of what happened, it wasn't that it was targeted at women or women were, it was just the nature of in which women have to live their lives. So McKinsey and Lean In put out a report, one of the reports. I didn't read the one about 100%, because I find that also a difficult statistic to reconcile in my mind. But the McKinsey Lean In study, which was only of women in the US, to be fair, showed that women lost about 39% of women who are 39% of global employment lost 54% of the overall jobs. Yeah. So that means women were many times more vulnerable. That study showed women's jobs were like 1.8 times more vulnerable. But yeah, it's just twice as vulnerable as men's jobs. And why? Several things. Women often worked in those sectors that were most affected. So all the casual labor, right? So a lot of the work in restaurants and hotels, all those work, a lot of those jobs, the ones that didn't have fixed contracts, they were largely held by women. Then, of course, women were required then to also do much more. They already do a lot of unpaid work. And during the pandemic, with everyone locked in at home, they had to do even more unpaid work, because then they were supervising children who are now studying from home. And to top it all off, of course, with not having any option to leave the home, there's a huge increase in domestic violence. So there was all these compounding things that meant that the pandemic had a really, overall for women around the world, it had very, very negative effects, and it did set women back by a lot. And it will take some doing. And in many developed countries, we still don't we still don't collect gender segregated data, which means it's hard for us to tell when something particularly affects women as opposed to something that affects society as a whole. So one of the good things in the last few years has been this increased pressure on governments to produce and to collect gender desegregated data. In Singapore, you still can't get gender desegregated data on a lot of things, and we've been pushing for that for a long time. In Europe, it's starting to be more available. In the US, it's very patchy. So it really depends where you're at and whether you can get, if you can't tell where, you can use data to direct your policies. But if you're not getting that data and you treat everyone with one with one set of rules, it doesn't always target the people who need the help the most. So that's essentially what's been happening. Women were already disadvantaged. Now they're just increasingly disadvantaged. So if you come from a country, like say Japan, right? So let's say Japan. Japanese women in the workplace have for a long time had huge systemic issues in terms of women growing into leadership roles, in terms of women's pay and pay equity. But you add to that mix small homes in which they have to then manage children, housework, everything in these small homes. It makes the pressure on women even higher. So you have cultural predisposition, culturally patriarchal societies, which that continue to be deeply patriarchal, and then you add all these additional pressures, and then you have a real cauldron of hell, essentially. And so there's been an increase in women, for instance, on the abortion issue. Many women were unable to receive abortions because abortions in many countries and in certainly many states in the US were categorized as non-essential services. So while hospitals were dealing with COVID and various other issues, they put abortions right at the bottom of the list, which meant that if you had been assaulted and you couldn't, it doesn't matter how, but whatever you wanted to do, you couldn't have access. Some countries in Europe made it possible, and I think around the world, some countries did make it possible for women to have a video consultation and then get the abortion pill where it was appropriate, mailed to them, and then they could have that at home. So but these things, these access to services, they changed a lot, and they particularly affected women. So I don't know, Joanne, you also look into this space. What did you notice?
Well, what I noticed was that the default, I think there's for vast simplification, but the reality that women who are married or women who have children is a different reality to, I think, people who are where the kids are either out of home or, like in my case, I'm single. So in some ways, as a few of you, one of whom is on this call, was like, gosh, it's been easy for you. I'm going, exactly. I have nobody to argue with.
Different challenges.
I mean, definitely different challenges. But I'm saying this because the challenge to take forward what you were talking about, Lavinia. What I noticed as COVID started locking in, and as people were having to keep kids in from school, or just the pieces of getting things done, the woman was the one who stepped into covering that. I'm really struggling to think of situations. But I have to say, Tim, you'll be the exception on that one, because I've seen how much you've been taking in looking after your daughter and the way that you and Lydia balance it. But truly,
and my husband too, right? He's very, very, very involved, and he chooses to be involved. And I think that's a big. I mean, the whole education thing. No, I'm not educating my kids. I'm not doing it. That's not what I was not put on this earth to educate my children. I mean, they're a little bit older, so it helps, but I can't do it. It drives me nuts.
and this is really huge, because if, like, I was seeing this in households where the orientation would go around how his job, how his income would be looked after, and hers were, oh, I'm so grateful for my wife. Well, I'm sitting here going like, nice, I appreciate that you were noticed. That's good. However, to what Lavinia's been talking about, the consequences, in essence, one party, and the default as being the female party, is the one who has stepped back in their career, stepped back in their role and their work, in many cases, which just means from the point of view, if you just think about it, it's a hiatus period for them. It's even on a straight what they're doing in their professional life. Plus, and I just really take my hat off to anybody who's been homeschooling, dealing with COVID jabs, in and out, and attempting to keep a house and a life together. I mean, I go like, that is a lot to do. And in a certain respect, I go like, and taking out, and the pressures that people have been on have been absolutely huge. So,
following from what you said there, Anna, sorry, just that piece, right? So there's the McKinsey-Lehman study also showed that a quarter of their respondents were thinking of stepping back in their careers. As in, this is a very large percentage of women who are considering taking a step back in their career as a result of what's been happening in this last year, in order to essentially do more unpaid work at home and with nurturing care, because it's been just so much pressure. So you are absolutely right with what you're saying. I mean, if that number of and if women step back, it's going to be so much harder for them to get back in later. And so we need to be thinking of different ways of ensuring that working from home or hybrid working can really work for women as well as for men, not just, and also I'm a little concerned, to be honest, that some employers are looking to pay less to people who work from home, when the people who work from home often work longer hours and have to deal with so much more as well in terms of carving out space in their homes and all of these things. So I'm a little concerned that employers like Google are starting to institutionalize paying people who work from home less.
That's a nice technique of reducing cost base.
So I'm just going to say, Tim, do you want to give the male perspective, and then we can sort of really do the what can we do about it? Because I think that's the important piece here. But Tim, have you got any sort of thoughts? You've been paying attention to any of the news around this and the reports?
First of all, I appreciate the position of the criticism against the expectation that the woman would be the one that sacrifices career because kids are stuck at home and stuff like that. I appreciate the frustration about that, because it doesn't it doesn't seem fair. I do also appreciate that if you've got two people working and you go, look, I'm making $100 and you're making $60, one of us has to give up something. It makes sense to be the $60 person, which is usually going to be the woman, and partly because of unfair pay practices, which is the big thing that sucks on that account. So I appreciate why that might be the decision that is made in the family. I also appreciate why that then would harm equality in the workplace. So all that being said, as a sort of my starting point, from a personal experience, Lydia made a decision a couple of years ago to leave her position in one company because it was just toxic. It was just getting toxic. It was affecting her self-confidence. It was affecting her, I think, her joy, because of an asshole male boss, and the structure and the expectations that he brought in from another country, and how he was leading his team. And of course, I'm there in the background going, here's strategy A, B, and C, and I was a real backseat driver for that one. But I was also saying, if you want to leave it and go and do something else, and go and do what you want to do, leave it. We'll be fine. And it took her a while, but she finally made, I think, a really brave decision to leave without a job to go to, because the toxicity of that environment, which had moved from we care about the people and we want to make a profit to we just want to make a profit. That was the problem. The problem is, and the selection of leaders had reinforced that was the direction that they were going in. And their PR machine was saying, we're doing all these cool things for people. But the truth was, the appointments that they made in the organization really spoke more than the PR spin on it. Anyway, then she went and got a job doing something that she is just shining in, which is working with a government organization helping older people make sure that they're taken care of and that they know about what the government's plan, all the programs and everything else that are there to help them, informing them about vaccinations, all of this sort of stuff. And she's just shining. She's probably working in some ways. She's working harder. She doesn't have to do ridiculously late night calls with Canada, but she is working harder in some ways. But she's loving it. So, and just as well, she got all that, because when COVID hit and she's working with sort of health stuff, and mine just when COVID happened, it was great. So my sort of we'll be fine. Had she not found something, we wouldn't have been fine.
Yeah.
But she found that very easily. It found her, actually, and so I guess my perspective on the 25% taking a step back, I don't know the study and I don't know the details of the study, and I would guess that there's been a bunch of people that through this last 2 years, nearly 2 years, I suppose, 18 months plus, have just gone to some degree. I was playing the wrong game, and I want to play a bigger game. I want to play a better game. It may mean I will get less, but I'm going to play a better game. I think some people will be like that. I guess this study wasn't looking at that. That would be my guess. I think a lot of people have been forced into taking a position based on I'm earning more than you, therefore you're the one who's going to take a hit. I think a lot of people have been forced into this based on a patriarchal society that expects women to take this role, which is a really unfair share of the workload.
But there's also no social safety net, right? There's no, so, and you think about this from single mothers, and especially women of color, there is zero safety net. So if they don't work, they can't earn, and they've still got to educate the children. They're still got to take, and they're still putting themselves at risk for COVID. So I think, so when we look at what we've got to do about it, if we look at the pandemic playbook, what I found incredible, every single man that has been accused of domestic violence should have been taken out of their home and put into a nice place while any lockdown happens, right? Get them out of the house. If they've already got, and we all know that a lot of men who've never committed domestic violence towards their partners did for the very, very, very first time. So we can deal with them, but at least get the ones that we know out of the homes, so we can do that, and then take care of the single mums who still have to earn, still have to survive, and still have to take care of their children and educate their children. And it's like everything. There was so many obvious things, and everyone knows that a pandemic's coming, and every government's got this playbook. But where was all this bit? Where was the bit where you take care of the people? That's what I found quite shocking. But as we look forward, I think women and men, we've all got to stand up and we've got to speak up. And equality is good for everyone. Men and women benefit from equality. It is not just a women's issue. It's a human issue. Men have more options. Women have more options. We can make different choices with our careers, the paths ahead. Equality is good for everyone. So we need to make sure it's not going to take us 200 years to get back on track, which is probably years. I know you tend to know those sort of numbers, but we've got to...
3.5 years ago when we did the purple elephant, it was over 200 years.
Yeah, exactly. So
it was now? Over 200 years then. So it's let's just say it's still definitely over 200 years. Yeah. But if we're talking, listen, like practical things. I think this conversation has highlighted two very practical things that we can either be doing or advocating to happen. You know, one of which is the data point that Lavinia brought forward, is that if we don't have gender segregated data, by default, we're going to be doing, the policymakers will be doing the vanilla answer based on this homogenous human being, which quite often is designed as a reflection of a male world. So the gender desegregated data allows a more nuanced insight into some of the differences, which would create different policy outcomes. Mm-hmm. And then I think, secondly, the point that Tim picked up on in his thinking that had come through in what was spoken before is, when you've got a systemic pay differential built into the system that says if you're female, you will get 25% less. Current data in Canada, Australia, the US, in the UK, it's 25% differential.
25, right?
24, 26, I'm just round,
Yeah.
But pretty much in that still. When you've got that as a standard differential, if you're of the same racial mix as the dominant culture, if you happen to be of a different racial profile, which is often called brown, or black, it will be somewhere in the order of 40 to 50% less. Mm. And that's significant. And, just so that the data, if you're a black man, you will get paid 10% than a white man. If you're a white woman, you get paid 25% less than a white man. So just saying the gender segregation on this is bigger than the racial segregation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the current number, by the way, for Anna, is because she did the one before, is 135.6 years. The generation was because last year the report, this is the World Economic Forum Gender Pay Gap report. Last year it showed at 99.5 years. So it's added like 36 years to parity. Yeah. And the large disparity, actually the largest disparity in most of the world exists in political representation. And this is where in almost every country, there are just not enough women making the rules.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's definitely another way that we can tackle the problem, right? Get more women into politics and into leadership positions and support them as well. And women should support, the other thing is women supporting all women, not just women of their own race. I think we need to come together and help each other rise too. But I think male allies, there's a lot of great men out there that are part of this, who want to be part of this because they know that it's good for everyone, right? So,
well, I think it helps if we stop seeing gender equality as a charity issue. This is an opportunity issue. This is not trying to fix women. We need to fix the situation. Yeah. So I think one of the problems that I've had with some of the talk around with the women about creating greater equity in the workplace for women has been it's treated as if it's a charity. It's really not. This is about tapping opportunity. Every study shows that companies that invest in women, countries that invest in women, often rise as a whole. So it's not a charity issue. This is not a nice to have when we have time and when we have space, then we'll create a little bit of something extra. This is not this is not the way it should pan out. It should be absolutely looking at the opportunities that are wasted. In a lot of the world, we're spending as much money educating girls as we are educating boys. And then somehow when they start in the workplace, women fall back, not for want of education or for competence. It's almost always workplace culture that holds women back. So I think it's time we stop trying to fix women. I don't think women are the problem. I think it's time we started fixing the structural issues in workplaces and in politics that keep women at bay because they're designed for men. All of this is designed for a male life. It's not designed for a woman's life. So it's time we start looking at that.
It's designed for a particular type of male life because the toxic cultures are toxic to guys as well.
Yeah. My friend Juzzy just said, just disappeared. Women are still considered a minority group, which is insane. I think there's 51% women versus men, so we're actually the majority. So, ladies, it's time to stand up. It's not a case of putting a bottle of sherry on the back of the ute to go with the beer. Do you remember that ad out of Australia where they took the sherry off because the ute collapsed? It's time for us to stand up, and I think it's time for us to stand up and demand it. And I'm ready to fight. So come and join me. And I know that all four of us are ready to fight. So Tim wants to say something before we move on.
I want to say, I think we should make illegal the interview question, what was your last drawn salary? Because that's not going to change the situation. The person should be paid commensurate with what the job requires, and not commensurate with an increase on their last drawn salary. Because if you've got a problem with salary, asking that question and making that your pay thing would make it a real issue. And people ask that all the time. What was your last? Because I'm going to pay you based on what somebody else paid you. No, I could have been a bad hang gliding instructor, but I could be a really good this, whatever it is. I know it's a stupid analogy, but so just get rid of that question. What's your last? That's not the answer, obviously, but it's one of them. And
but the blind auditions, right? So I used to be a musician, so when we do a solo, you have to stand on stage and perform. And so professional musicians, when they audition for a job, they started to do blind auditions, which you can do with an instrument, but not with a voice, right? And basically, all of a sudden, all the principal players in all these orchestras around the world were women, because they were judged on their performance, not on the fact that they were male or female. So how we bring that in, right? How do we bring it in? How can you do a blind career audition or career interview? But we got some big problems, and I think we've just got to always be hopeful and looking forward and trying to do all our best. Because what Lavinia said is country GDPs increase significantly when there is a focus on female equality. But more than that, companies with 3 or more women on the board, or more women in leadership positions, that they are more profitable businesses. So it makes financial sense. And usually that's all you need to convince men that they need to focus on it. It makes financial sense. So why are we still stuffing around? That's what I don't get. Like, let's just move forward and create a better world, because it all contributes to us. And how we build our societies, how we design our products, software engineers. If men are designing the world, I mean, how can they possibly, if I was designing a city, I'd put a female public toilet. I'd put 2 to every 1 male public toilet, because I know that's important. A male wouldn't do that because they don't know if it's important. Getting a pram around a street, I know what that takes. A male might not necessarily, it's all that sort of stuff. So we need all the great thinking and the minds in the world to come together to build societies that work for everyone. It's just common sense to me.
Right, but it doesn't take into account all the vested interests, right? So people have an interest in keeping things the way they are. People don't want to include others. So, I mean, here, one of the things that's been interesting, I saw for the first time, actually, I'm sure it exists in other countries, but my husband's a diplomat, and there are at least 12 postings at the moment where German ambassadors are sharing the job with their partner. So that means there are 2 diplomats in the family, a husband and a wife, or sometimes a husband and a husband, where they are now sharing the role of ambassador. And it's so interesting at the very top. So the job sharing has existed at all levels, but now in some countries, Germany is being represented by 2 ambassadors who are often a couple that are job sharing.
That's awesome.
So this is also very unusual, and it's rare here as well. I mean, we only have, I think, only about 1/3 of the ambassadors. It's just as one measure, only about 1/3 of the ambassadors around the world are women. So absolutely, we need more women in leadership. But, we also have a lot of narratives that are completely false that we never think about. We think women are bad at STEM. Do you know the only person ever in history to have won 2 Nobel Prizes, our measure of genius, still in the world? There's only one person ever in history to have won 2 Nobel Prizes, one in physics and one in chemistry. And that was not Albert Einstein. That was Marie Curie. And she won it the second year that the Nobel Prize even existed. She won it because her husband advocated for her. He knew that the Nobel Committee was going to give it to him and not to her, and he advocated for her to be included. And yet, till today, only about 5% of the Nobel has been won by women. Since that, although a woman won it at the very beginning and continues to be the only person in history to have ever won a Nobel in 2 different sciences. Women were the code breakers in the Second World War. The women were the ones in those first computers, the first computers we ever had. The code breakers were women. The Bletchley existed because of the women who were there on those very first computers. And yet today we think it's men in jeans and hoodies that are good at coding. We have created narratives that exclude women, when if you look a little bit further, you'll see that it's absolutely not true. There's nothing intrinsically that makes women bad at one job or better at other jobs. It's so much a cultural construct.
I agree, and I you know, the thing that always breaks my heart is what have we lost by holding women back, and gay people back? You know, what have we lost? You know, one of my chapters in my book, Anna, is do you yearn? How many people are out there yearning for a future that they're not allowed to have based on some defined societal thing that doesn't allow them to go and fully express themselves? And if we could live in a world where we allowed everybody to express themselves, to be who they truly are, and to follow the path that they truly want to pass, I think we'd have this, wow, what a world. I want to live in a world like that. So we're gone a little bit over again, of course, but great conversation. We could go into so much depth. What else has been capturing your attention in the news this week? Funny, quirky, serious, just one, maybe one each?
I'll go first. The piece that captured my attention was a fabulous podcast that was talking about the divorce booster. Full disclosure, it was one where Andrea was talking with her husband Steve on her podcast about just like how what was really going on, which I loved, because it was just a very real world conversation about the dynamics and stress of two different human beings dealing with both their bodies kind of not being terribly happy and still having to cope with life, which is what people are dealing with right now. So I loved it.
Oh, that's cool. I wouldn't put it in the news section, but yeah, I don't know. I think.
Well, no, but see, it is. You see, the thing is, the news is so often the dramatized story as opposed to the reality. But this is daily life.
Yeah.
This is day-to-day life.
I think a lot of people have. Yeah, exactly. A lot of people have been reaching out to me saying, you know, behind closed doors, they're going through some really hard times. Not necessarily even the same reason of combination of boosters and stuff that we went through, but just, you know, like this really deep, dark depression. And they've realized it since they've been vaccinated. And it's kind of just, I think just when you know that, you can say, okay, well, this is just this. It's not real. It's not how I really feel. I'm just going through this period that this vaccination has created. So, yeah, I hope it helps people who are struggling. Just have a listen if you're struggling with a post-vaccination, especially a booster vaccination. That's what we were focused on. What about Tim? What about you? What have you been paying attention to?
News-wise, I had a look at the Nobel laureate, most popular Nobel prizes. It was interesting that you just talked about Nobel prizes just now, and the ones that, and of course the list of nominees is never revealed. It's part of the way it works, but that doesn't stop people trying to make their own list. WHO for coronavirus, Black Lives Matter movement for calling for systemic changes around the world, forcing nations to address racism in their own societies, which is quite cool. Alexei Navalny for being a human rights activist and democracy activist in Russia. That'll be an interesting political one if he gets it. U.S. voting rights activist Stacey Abrams for boosting voter turnout. Greta Thunberg again, so she could be a dual winner for constant efforts in curbing climate change, although the last time it was Time Person of the Year, right? So, yeah. Did she win a Nobel, Greta? I don't think so, right?
No, it was Time
Person of the Year.
No, last year the Nobel Prize was won by I'll remember. United Nations. I'll remember.
Okay, you remember. And yes, Joe Biden for inheriting a country reeling under the COVID-19 pandemic to get a Nobel Prize for inheriting a disaster. Okay, but that would be basically a polemic against Trump, I think. And Jacinda Ardern for handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. Which would be a really interesting one, and I'm imagining she would need to win it quickly before New Zealand goes out of control. But yeah,
sorry, it was 2020. It was the World Food Program.
There you go, World Food Program. Yeah. So I was just like, interesting.
Please donate to the World Food Program if you've got money. They are working tirelessly to feed them millions and millions of people, especially the 20 countries either in or facing famine, and they're doing very important work. And please set up a regular contribution and tell everybody you know to do it as well, because they're desperate.
Yeah, anyway. I want to add to that is that if you actually look at groups that have done a lot to prevent war, so there was this Nobel Peace Prize is the one that we're talking about, that the preventing of war, groups who've won the prize, if you actually look at some of the threads, there's an interesting thread where it's about groups who've done substantive things to reduce famine and hunger, because the number of wars historically that have been generated through that is huge.
Yeah.
And so, and hence, literally, why the call out last year was for the food program, because feeding people, it's so simple, so intrinsically important, is one of the most powerful ways to create peace.
Yeah, and also it absolutely is. And the amount of people who need to be fed has escalated so dramatically since the beginning of the pandemic. The numbers are absolutely quite staggering. But I think, the WFP have been phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. So we contribute.
A couple of other things.
All right, sorry, Tim's got some more.
Yeah, I was going to say a couple of other things that caught my attention in the news was the U.S. Senate voting again to temporarily extend the debt ceiling once more so that they can not default on their loan. And the other one was that I found really interesting was looking at what's behind the China-Taiwan divide, particularly with increasing escalations in just sort of political prodding and what's going on there. And there was right now there's some quite nice articles which are explaining the whole history of the whole tension, going back to old dynasties and everything else.
Yeah,
a lot, the whole thing, the toing and froing, and the of even during the revolution and all of that. So, but even way before that, as to who owns the island and stuff like that. But it's interesting, and it's just right now there's this. As I was reading all of these things, that U.S. debt, default would create a huge ripple in the global financial markets. China's the Evergrande sort of disaster and default there happening. The China-Taiwan, there's a destabilization that's rippling everywhere. That's happening. So that's a bit of having a destabilization of a 5-year-old over there too.
Yeah, I can hear it. And we are in October, of course, and October is the month that is traditionally when the major global recessions happen. So if you go back through history, the majority of them happen in October. And there's been some talk about that as well in the media, that with Evergrande right, in China. And we're in a, if we can get through October and not go into a global recession, I think that will be a good thing. I don't know if people can cope with that coming, but stay alert. Lavinia, any other news been capturing your attention?
So 2 things here. So one is that Angela Merkel is looking super relaxed now that she knows she's not going to be chancellor for much longer. I'm seeing her in the news looking more relaxed than she's ever looked in her entire life. She's looking super, super glad to be leaving, I think. I think Trump was the final the straw that broke the camel's back for her. She must have been thinking, I'm tired of nursemaiding these men now. So look, aside from that, we're in the middle of a coalition creating time here in Germany. So Germany never has one party that dominates. It's always a number of parties that have to get together and work out an agenda. So that's what they're doing right now. But the other big news here was interesting. Chimamanda Adichie was here for the Humboldt Forum, and I think she's still in Berlin. And she was talking about ethnological art and the return of pillaged art from Europe back into Asia and to Africa. And Germany has already begun a process of returning many pieces, including some of the Benin stones that are here in Germany. So it's not that it's doing a perfect job, and she did take the opportunity to scold Germany as well for its history in Namibia. So, but it was interesting the way we look at it. We always, the fact that we even call it ethnological art is for her, and I never thought about it. The the way we tell these stories, we tell the stories from the victor, if you like. It's always from a European perspective. It's always from that. And so it's been interesting. I love listening to her. I love the way she turns the way you look at something to a whole different, this perspective shift is one of her great talents as a storyteller. And so her being here at the Humboldt Forum was really, really eye-opening. I very much thought that was a brilliant speech that everyone should listen to.
I absolutely agree. And I've got it, and I'll put it in my weekend read. So I've just put it here as well as a link. Very powerful. She didn't hold anything back. And she was absolutely spot on. And I thought the way that she spoke about it, because as someone who's done ancient history and archaeology, like I find the heritage so precious, and a lot of that heritage would have been lost over the years. But that's beside the point. That's not our decision to make. So, yeah, it's a very powerful video. And the final one I just want to say before we go on to the final couple of things is there's a new malaria vaccine. It's taken over 100 years to create. It's going to be focused on the most prevalent malaria parasite in Africa. It's not going to be the cure-all. It's not going to stop malaria, but it's the most progress ever made. And this is going to mean that a lot of children are going to survive. I don't know if many people realize this, that you build up resistance to malaria, but you've got to constantly be getting it as from a child. And you need blood transfusions, and so many thousands, hundreds of thousands of children are dying every year. So this is, I think it's really, really wonderful news. We live in a part of the world in Thailand and in Singapore where malaria is part of life. But I think this is a wonderful story, because 94% of malaria in the world is in Africa. So I was very happy to see that. All right.
Yeah, it was like 200. Andrea, it was like 216,000 children were dying of malaria last year, something like that, and 94% in Africa, like you said. Yeah. And while that vaccine, as it is at the moment, is targeting one aspect of malaria and can save possibly 40%, which doesn't sound like a lot, but 40% of those kids. I mean, that's still what's that? 80,000 kids. That's amazing.
It's massive. It's massive.
It's a fantastic start, and it's taken 6 years to get to this point, which makes us think sometimes, hang on
100 years to get to this point, and then 6 years since the testing, right?
Yeah, 6 years since the testing of this particular one, which makes you think, what do we really prioritize? Because we scrambled for COVID. I know it's a bit different and everything else, and malaria is very complex. So yeah, but still, it's a good news. It's a good start. Yeah. It's a good news. It is a good news.
It's huge news. Malaria kills 400,000 people on average every year. Yeah. So it's been systemically a massive killer for an incredibly long period of time, and there's a lot of different varieties of the parasite. So it's the fact that there is something that's not about taking a tablet every day or every week is absolutely huge.
I had to take those tablets once. I actually stopped and decided it was better to get malaria. They drove me nuts. They dried my hair out. But the dreams that I were having were so out of control. I just went, I got to stop doing this. And then somebody I was talking to said, it's better to get malaria, so you've got it, rather than take the tablets to suppress it. And I was like, all right, that sounds like good advice to me. So I've never had it. Steve's had it.
Yeah, where we lived, I lived in Nigeria as a kid. And
yeah, right.
So we malaria tablets was just, breakfast, you have your malaria tablet. It was just, was just the way it was. And then when we were in the Philippines, there was a weekly one that we had. But we had friends who caught what's called cerebral malaria. Yeah. And basically it's one that gets in and attacks your brain. And we had friends who died of it. So, that's not one you'll play with.
And you can't get that. That's one you can't get twice. If you get it twice, you die, right? So you can have it.
Mostly because you died the first time.
All right. So okay. So it kills you the first time.
Different sorts of malaria, but
exactly.
Cerebral, it's super.
Yeah. So today we celebrate a good vaccination story. Scientists aren't so bad after all. What's distracting you at the moment? What are you reading, watching, listening to that keeps your attention away from the depressing subjects in the news? Anything?
Lavinia, what are you up to?
I've been binge watching How to Get Away with Murder. My husband's a little worried now. Do you know what's amazing about How to Get Away with Murder, and generally about Shonda Rhimes, generally her productions, is that they show, again, like Chimamanda Adichie, right? It's a whole different type of story. Here is a dark-skinned Black woman who is absolutely a genius, but she's not perfect. She's imperfect. It shows us a real view of people that we don't see real views of generally. We don't see, we either see them all good, all bad, all victim, all. It's like it's giving this much more complex nuances to characters, and that's what I really love about Shonda Rhimes and her shows. So yeah, How to Get Away with Murder has been my latest binge watch.
Okay, that sounds good. All right, Anna, your latest binge watch or read? Because you tend to escape through your books, right?
I escape through my books. My next one is that I got over there is narrative economics. That's what that's my weekend read. Aside from your weekend reads, is going to be reading narrative economics. I've seen to. It's kind of funny. For a long time, I had not been reading books written by economists. For the last little while, I've read several, because behind the scenes, the narrative of what creates an economically prosperous society is one of the hidden narratives on the world. And so working my way through a bunch of the sort of modern thinkers in this kind of thing to get an insight on, like, well, what stories are being created. So my next one is to binge read narrative economics. It'll be fun to see what that one does. Sorry. Not exactly light entertainment. I need to go find myself a chick flick.
We had Susanna on one week, and she was about to go through thousands and thousands of Excel spreadsheets on environment data, and that was her relaxation. So I think whatever floats your boat, right? Tim, what are you relaxing with?
Zig and Sharko on Netflix. It's a multi episode, because each episode is 7 minutes long, kids TV show, I suppose, where a famished laughing hyena is trying to eat the mermaid on a cruise ship, and she's protected by a muscly shark who's in love with her. And it's I mean, Zoe watches it, my 5-year-old, and I just find it absolutely hysterical. Based on this gender inequality thing, it's probably not the best thing, because you got two males fighting over a mermaid who seems oblivious to the whole thing, but it's hilarious. And she does come out on top a lot as the one that's got any sense at all. But I find it very, very funny. I mean, a lot of the kids stuff I don't really find that funny. It's just like puerile, whatever. Well, no, I like puerile. It's badly written, but this one is I just find it hysterical. Zig and Sharko, you watch 7 minutes and you'll laugh. It's so stupid, but it's cleverly written. I think it's French writers or possibly Canadian. Yeah. But yeah.
I'll have to send you the one that my boys used to be into, and it was two slugs in the gutter and how they lived their days. I can't remember what it was called, but completely like, whoa, a lot of children's stuff you think about. LSD.
Do they end up on an island? They end up on the deserted island?
Two slugs? I don't know. I didn't really. I haven't
really
another
one with a couple of slugs, but it was. Yeah. Okay. But yeah.
So I'm still living in watching what do you call it, Downton Abbey for the second time. I'm on season 3, episode 3 now. So Edith has just been dumped at the altar. But I've got to tell you, this last couple of weeks, going through this sort of COVID reaction, not COVID booster reaction, I just need it, and my husband needs it too, and it's just really lovely. We just sort of escape to another time in history when people are nice to each other, and there's a couple of horrible people in the mix, but they all get sorted out in the end. So we've been enjoying that. So that's pretty much what's keeping me distracted.
Actually, I want to add one thing, and that sounds awesome, by the way. And it's
watch it again if you've seen it the first time. But you'll be amazed.
I like the idea of it's an escape, right? What we're talking about is escapes from whatever we're going through. Where we are right now in this sort of chalet. I mean, it's called a chalet. It's a simply appointed room with a nice view, but it's just really, really nice. But what's made a huge difference, I find, to us is we bought these things. This is a bad idea, but
scooters.
It's a scooter.
Oh, is it a scooter?
It's a
personal mobility device.
It's a non-electric scooter.
Yeah, nice.
And we've been zipping around on that. And Zoe, Lydia and I both we got them from Decathlon or something. A new one and a second-hand one, and we bought one for Zoe, but she doesn't use hers very much. She uses ours, which she can scoot on by herself, which is great, but she's usually riding on ours because she gets tired after like 1 second. So, but we're having a ball just getting out. And I know some people in lockdown, this is probably not the best thing for them to watch, but getting out and just zipping about. And being here, one of the things we're doing is we're just zipping down to the food court, or we're zipping over to some boardwalk and just getting out in the fresh air and the sun, seeing people wandering about and just enjoying that. And it's just been that's been a great escape. Even though we're still working, even though we're still getting stuff done, it's just been awesome.
Yeah. Now get yourself an adult scooter if you haven't, but I would like to give you a heads up. Not a good idea when you're drunk. I've had a couple. I actually had a couple of stacks on mine, which were very funny. But anyway, let's wrap it up. So look, just so everybody knows, I upload this onto my podcast on Common Courage every week, unedited, straight from the show. So if listening to something on audio is your preference, it's there. Lavinia, thank you so much for joining us from Germany. You're our first European guest. We really appreciate having you here, and I mean we could talk forever on this topic of equality and why it's important and how we can sort it out. Joanne, thank you for stepping in because Joe couldn't be with us today. We really appreciate it, and hope you're happy to do that occasionally. And Lavinia, do come back anytime you want. And Tim, good to see you, dolls. And have a great weekend, everyone. Right? You want to say goodbyes?
Bye, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Goodbye.
Great.
Thanks,
everyone.
Excellent no-show.
What's that?
Yeah, Joe.
Thank you for an excellent no-show, Joe.
Yeah, right. Cool. All right. End of the broadcast. Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining us. We've had a few people participating. I really appreciate it. So see you next week.